And personally, how have you come to terms with that problem, and how have you held to your faith? Hearing one argument after another that on these grounds that Christianity falls apart in the face of suffering and evil.
Mm. Well, the first thing I would always want to say is that there are no easy answers to this, and if I was to stand here and say I've discovered a perfect way of answering this, it'd be foolish, because if you say that, you've already kind of, I think, lost the argument, because you have to approach this with humility and understand that when it comes to God, when it comes to evil, when it comes to human suffering, it's very hard to actually understand what's going on behind everything. We only have a very limited perspective on it, and I sort of, the first thing I'd want to do with anyone who's actually going through that suffering is not give them a theodicy. I would rather sit with them, cry with them. That's what people actually need most of the time. So I think that's just a word of caution to those who do want to leap in immediately with an answer. But having said that, when it does come to the time for sort of those intellectual questions about why would God allow this, I guess I've come to the view through a number of different scholars and thinkers on this that have helped me to kind of put the pieces together. C.S. Lewis, very influential on me, and the way in which, just at the very outset, he points out really that if you're going to have a problem of evil, you kind of still need God. It's hard to get rid of God, because by what are you measuring good and evil, right and wrong, justice?
Right.
This comes to another sort of argument for the existence of God, the moral argument. If you're going to say that there's something wrong with the world, you have to have a measure by which you can judge right and wrong. And it appears to me, in a godless universe, in a naturalistic universe, it's very hard to say that such a thing as right and wrong, or even evil, exists. It only seems to make sense, that very concept, if there is a God that grounds the idea of morality, good and evil, right and wrong. So that's kind of your very first point, is that you kind of, to have a problem of evil, you kind of need a God that grounds the very concept. Why would that God allow evil, though? I mean, I think we've struggled to see from our perspective things that obviously are only open to God from a God's eye perspective on these things. I think, though, we can edge towards some kind of answers. I think that, for instance, the fact that freedom is an important thing in human life means that there are obviously going to be situations in which we use our freedom for evil. Now, if God were to simply step in and overrule every action that humans ever took that led to evil outcomes, then we would just be robots, we'd be automatons, we would not have free will. And without free will, you don't really have what it means to be human. You can't love. Love is something that is freely given, freely received. So at the very starting point, there's this kind of measure of freedom that God has given the world. And that, for me, seems to be a starting point to understand why we do live in a world where it's possible for things to go wrong, is because actually love is only possible in a world where things can go wrong. That kind of would be my starting point for maybe if I was in a conversation about this. But there would be lots of other places I'd want to go as well, with other things. I mean, at the center of it for me, I would always want to end up with Jesus Christ, and the fact that whether you think this is a good argument or not when it comes to suffering and evil, in the Christian story, God is not distant from evil. This is not an abstract concept. Or he came and he experienced suffering, evil, rejection, humiliation, abuse. And for me, that may be actually the one thing someone can hold on to if they're going through that God knows what it feels like. And that may still be a great mystery, but it may be just enough for someone to kind of make sense of suffering, knowing that God has been through suffering and knows suffering. And in some mysterious way, as Christians, we are united with Christ even in our suffering. That, for me, is a really significant thing.
Yeah, you're not only a very skilled host and interviewer, you're actually a really good preacher. And I wrote a quote from a sermon of yours that I watched. You were on fire, and it goes it's in step with what you've just shared. But you concluded a sermon that I saw online by saying, "But I see a very different universe" to Richard Dawkins. You'd been talking about Dawkins and how the universe, according to him, is senseless, without meaning, just indifferent.
Mm.
And when I look around, you said, I don't just see physical processes and natural laws. Sorry, I'm trying to read my own handwriting. I see love, you said. I see truth. I see beauty. I see hope. I see good and evil. I see a universe that's teeming with purpose and meaning. I mean, that is
Mm.
a powerful message and another reminder you're a man of many talents. But I hear in that conviction that Christianity is maybe not the only way to make sense of suffering, but it's truly a massive part of what it means to be Christian. Is that suffering
Mm.
is we find meaning in it, and more than that, we find God in the suffering, like in the suffering,
Mm.
because we worship and
Mm.
follow a God who suffered.